All right, well, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to our final show. Normally, Mark Sarlo calls us today, and, well, apparently he's busy out there in Colorado. Maybe they got weather coming in, I don't know, but normally this is the time of day that he gets up and gives us a call. But if you got a car question, give us a call at 850-763-0555. Car questions come in many forms. They really do. Some of them are as simple as, what kind of oil do I use or what kind of fluids I use, and those are pretty, you can find that pretty easy on the internet. But sometimes we get things a little bit more difficult. Why do I have certain codes? What does this mean when you have this problem? Just because you have a code doesn't necessarily mean that part is faulty. That's the thing that's hardest thing for me to teach technicians out there. I've had cars that come in with a code for an EGR that's not flowing properly, or even something that says you got a faulty fuel pump. This is the thing I try to tell my people. Just because you have a code and the data on the scanner shows it's not working right, you need to verify it, physically verify it. Do you have enough flow? How can you tell if you have enough flow? Oh, here's a perfect example. EGR. You've got a problem, you're getting a P0401. That's a pretty common problem on a lot of vehicles that have got a few years on them, and that means insufficient EGR flow. And just about everyone out there, when they see that, they go, okay, ain't a big deal, my EGR valve's not working right, I can ignore it. And my light may be on, but don't worry about it. Well, I'm going to tell you, if you ignore it, you're going to ruin your catalytic converter. That's honest to goodness, because if it won't run an EGR flow, the EGR is not going. The catalytic converter is not going to be tested. It's not going to light it off like it's supposed to. It's not going to do the things it's supposed to do, and you'll end up ruining that $1,000 catalytic converter, if not more, by ignoring a check engine light. Okay, so EGR flow P0401. That's the problem. So we've got the code. It says we got a bad problem with it. And so how are you going to find out if it's a bad EGR, if it's the flow's bad? Well, all you have to do is let the car idle. Find the EGR controller, that's right, and it's an EGR vacuum controller that allows 5 inches of vacuum to go to the EGR valve. Now, there's 2 ways you can do it. You can actually put 5 inches of vacuum on it with a little vacuum pump and see if the engine stumbles and almost dies. If it does, then you know the passageways aren't clogged up. That's the first thing I would do. If I didn't know where the EGR regulator was and I didn't know how it worked, I would actually sit there and put vacuum on the EGR valve, or electrically operate it, bidirectional controls or whatever I have to do, with a scanner, or even manually manipulate it with a ground wire and a hot wire to move the EGR valve open to see if the engine stumbles and almost dies at idle. If it does, there's nothing wrong with the flow. There's nothing wrong. It's got plenty of flow. It's not detecting a flow, and that could be because the EGR regulator is faulty, and it doesn't give you a code for that. It just says you got insufficient flow. That could be because the EGR regulator doesn't work like it's supposed to, not giving that 5 inches of vacuum, or you got a broke vacuum line. That could be it as easy. So that's why I tell people, just because you've got a code that, EGR P0401 insufficient flow, that doesn't mean your EGR valve is bad. There's ways of verifying, actually physically verifying what's going on. We had that yesterday. I was talking about yesterday's show about a P069E on General Motors products. When you get that code, that means there's something wrong with your fuel delivery system. It won't tell you what. It could be a fuel pump. It could be a fuel pump computer that tells the fuel pump what speed to run at. And they try to keep the pressure around 43 to 45 pounds. And it uses a sensor that tells the pressure on it, and it sends that information to a computer, that one I'm talking about, and it makes sure that it keeps the pressure where it needs to be. Now, if you get P069E, if you got too much fuel pressure, that could be a problem. If you got too little fuel pressure, it could be a problem. And so if you get a car that says it has too much fuel pressure, you need to verify that you do have too much fuel pressure. Find out what the fuel pressure is, hook up a mechanical gauge, and say, okay, do I have too much fuel pressure? Yes or no? If the answer is yes, you got too much fuel pressure. Why do you have too much fuel pressure? Is it because the pump's stuck? And because the fuel pump controller is actually demanding wide open throttle? Is that what the problem is? Or is it because the sensor that's on there that tells what the pressure is defective? Or maybe the wiring is faulty on it. These are things that I run into all the time, and normally I run into them after they've been looked at by at least 1 or 2 other shops, and everybody throws their hands up and they go, we really don't know what's wrong with it. There's about one guy we know of that's crazy enough to take these, and that's me. Well, I'm not crazy enough. It's just that I have a systematic approach way to fixing things. Now, can I fix everything? I wish I could say yes. I can't. I've had some cars I just throw my hands up. I really don't know. But most of the problems I fix, they're really quite simple when you break it down. It's usually a faulty ground or lack of power or both. And we see this all the time. You have to be systematic about it. If you see it on the scanner, that doesn't mean it's the gospel. It's kind of like some people say, well, it's on the internet, it's got to be true. Well, just because it's on your scanner doesn't mean it's true. This is processed information. This is not real time, believe it or not. It's a few seconds old. By the time I look at it, it's already, it's already a dozen frames down. I mean, by the time I can look at it and go, okay, the fuel trim is this, it's already gone way to another step. It's just giving me a general idea of what's happening, and it's up to me to interpret what's going on. And that's what scanners do. So if you've got a car that says insufficient flow or insufficient fuel pressure or whatever, you need to verify that's what the problem is. I've had too many mechanics that work for me over the years say, oh, insufficient flow must be a bad EGR. You need to make sure. Or I've had them come in, car runs too lean, must be bad oxygen sensors. Whoa, never. If anyone tells you your oxygen sensors are all bad at the same time, you need to look real close, because the odds of all oxygen sensors going bad at one time are pretty slim. Now, I have seen them being contaminated. I have seen cars get stuff put into the gas tank that really messed them up. It messed up a lot more than the oxygen sensors. Things like mothballs. People put mothballs in their gas tank. People do things like that. They do weird stuff out there because trying to get better fuel mileage. When gas was at $4 a gallon, we saw lots of strange stuff a few years ago. Gas is slowly making its way back up, but maybe people won't go crazy again and do some of the strange stuff they did back a few years ago. But the biggest thing is verify that you're actually having the problem that your scanner sees. If your scanner says you've got 45 volts and it drops to 0, then all of a sudden it's back to, 45 PSI and it drops to 0, then back to 45 PSI or 80 PSI, back to 0. Put your pressure gauge on it and verify it's doing that. If it's doing that, okay, you got a problem there. You need to figure out. Maybe it's a fuel pump. Maybe it's a controller. What's going on? But if you put it on there and it doesn't match, if you've got 45 to 45 PSI and it bounces a little bit and it's fine on your fuel pressure mechanical gauge and the car is running, but you're looking at your scanner and it's going 0, you may have an electrical problem. You may have a sensor that's faulty. You could have bad wire, or when the connector is going to it. You could have lack of 5-volt reference, or lack of a ground, or lack of a signal wire. So these things need to be checked out, and that's one of the things that I found out. 12 volts scare a lot of people. You'd think 110 volts or 220 would scare people because you get shocked. Well, the same people that are scared of 110, 220 volts, which I got a good healthy respect for, they don't understand that 1 or 2 volts missing from 12 volts will cause things not to work. Now, if you lose 1 or 2 volts from 110 volts, things still work. Maybe not as fast, maybe not as well, but they still work. But if you have a system that calls for 12 volts and you're only putting out 10 volts, it ain't going to work. It won't even turn a car over. I've had cars that come in, you turn the key, and all you get is click. That's all you get. And the customer goes out and changes the battery, does all this, does that, changes the starter, does all these things. Come to find out, the ignition switch is the problem. You got a voltage drop of 2 volts. We're going from, instead of 12 volts going to the starter, you're only getting 10. So it just goes click, 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 and then occasionally it'll start. And that's because of a voltage drop. So just because you've got information that says, in your scanner that says, you got an open or you got this, and you may have those things, but always look at things differently. Don't just take for face granted. I have people say all the time, you heard me say it earlier, if it's on the internet, it's got to be true. Well, I have people say the same thing on the scanner. It's on my scanner, it's got to be true. No, not necessarily. It's processed information. It's a few seconds old. What you're trying to do is trying to get an idea of what's happening on it. Now, on bidirectional control, it's the same thing. That's where scanners come in. You can open and close the EGR valves, or you can pulse the injectors when the car, you can see what kind of drop they have on the fuel pressure. There's lots of tests out there. And good technicians know how to use all the tools that are given to them, whether it's a scanner or a fuel pressure gauge or a volume test or whatever. They put all those things together. Not just one scanner is needed in a shop. I'll be honest with you, in my shop we have, and if I'm exaggerating, I don't mean to, I'd say we probably have 15 scanners. And people, what? Well, about 10 of them are factory scanners, and they're all on laptops. They are for General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, Honda, Toyota, you name it, Jaguar, Land Rover. These are computers specifically for the manufacturer's car. That's why I got to get a car in here and needs reprogramming. And I sit there and I'm saying, this could be the problem, but instead of me, say, well, I don't know what's wrong with it. It has to be reprogrammed. Sitting off the dealership, I'll reprogram the thing and see if it fixes it. If it fixes it, great. That's what was wrong with it. It needed to be reprogrammed. Sometimes that's all it takes is reprogramming like a PO401. I remember I talked about that earlier on a Ford truck. If you get that, especially in an older model Explorer, say like a 2000, 2004, somewhere in that general area, and you've had all the parts changed, I'll guarantee you, if you have someone do a reprogramming on it, that problem will go away. I've seen that more than once. I've had people had one guy put on 3 EGR valves, 2 controllers, EGR controllers, made sure all the vacuum lines were right, took the intake manifold off, cleaned out the passageways, did all that, brought it to me, said, I've done all this, can you figure it out? And I said, sure, I can figure it out, but I'm going to charge you to figure it out. I said, I'm tired of paying money, I just figure it out. Walked out there, grabbed my scanner, opened the EGR valve, engine installed. Well, that's working fine. Did all the things, EGR works fine, it's doing like it's supposed to do, but I'm still getting a PO401. Went to the internet, punched in the number of Ford website, came up reprogramming. Did a reprogramming on. Didn't tell me what the reprogramming was for on Ford. They won't tell you. I wish they would. Not like General Motors or other cars. They just say it needs to be reprogrammed. You do it. Reprogrammed it, went for a ride, drove it, kept it 3 days. Light never came back on. Gave it to the customer. He was like, I cannot believe something as simple as that. Yes, sir, something as simple as moving some electrons around on the internet. It's all it takes to fix your car. Thank you so much for watching our show. Thank you so much for being a part of our show. And if you like our show, tell our sponsors out there, Mr. Reuter Plumbing, Interstate Batteries, Baytown Tires. These people help make our show possible. And we appreciate you watching. And tell your friends. We'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye, everybody.